Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your fifth and final flipped video of this unit on testing and individual differences, aka intelligence. We are on your best friend pages 544, through, it should actually say 556. This is 544 through 556, typo on my part, sorry. We're going to talk about a lot of different things in this one. The heritability of intelligence, the impacts of environment on intelligence, and thus genes as well, and also the impacts of gender on intelligence. And when I say the impacts of gender, it's really going to be more like gender differences in intelligence. We'll look at some fun ways men and women compare. Here we go. So first thing you guys got to remember, heritability is the concept that we look at how much the differences between people can be accounted for by genes. So if you take a population, you give them all an intelligence test, how much can the difference in their scores, I'm back on the bell curve, how much can the difference in their scores between the people over here and the people over here, what percentage of that difference can we attribute to genes? Well, let's find out. To figure this out, the impact of genes on intelligence, we do what we always do when we are worried about genes. We look at twins. And if you give twins intelligence test scores, they are extremely closely correlated. They are extremely similar. Part of that, we might say, is because twins have very similar gray matter amounts in their brains, especially identical twins. You'll remember, the more gray matter you have, especially in certain areas related with memory, processing, so on and so forth, the more likely you are to score highly on an intelligence test. Researchers have also identified several genes related to intelligence. So you'll remember Charles Spearman theorized that we had this factor G that led to general intelligence. Researchers don't think there's just one gene that contributes to G, but they think there are several different genes that work together and can help someone have more G, have more intelligence in general, that general intelligence quotient. So intelligence is highly heritable. In general, you can blame a lot of your intelligence on your parents and your grandparents and the lineage from which you come. However, the environment does play a very big role. So for example, the different cultures might value different types of intelligence. For example, if you grew up in an indigenous culture, which is a big word for a sort of a, to be slightly unpolitically correct, a native culture, you might have a high degree of naturalistic intelligence. You might be very good at working with the world around you in nature, but you might be terrible at reading. You might not be able to read. You never had written words before, so how could you? Your environment obviously is going to play a role to a certain extent. At the same time, there are sort of things in our environment that can hurt our intelligence. And a good example of that is for those of you who listen to the news right now. In Flint, Michigan, it's a city in Michigan, there is so much lead, which is a metal, the metal lead, like the element, in the drinking water that they can't drink it. And the reason you don't want to drink drinking water that has a ton of lead in it is because lead, exposure over time to lead, can cause serious long-term cognitive decline in children. So this is an issue in a lot of communities, not just in Flint, because kids tend to have an exposure to lead. Lead used to be everywhere, and a lot of places got cleaned up, but a lot of places didn't. And so if you live in a place where you are being exposed to lead, you are right then and there less likely to be considered intelligent throughout life. You are less likely to score well on intelligence tests just because of your lead exposure and its impacts on your brain. Environment's important. So some gender differences in intelligence tests. I gave you guys a bunch right here. And probably a lot of these are not, they're kind of stereotypical, but research bears them out. For example, women are better at detecting and reading emotion in people than men are. Women are just smarter about interpersonal stuff in general. Everything I'm saying here is in general and is a stereotype, but statistically speaking. Women are better at remembering things and locating objects that they've lost. They're better at remembering words. They're better at verbal skills, like reading and writing would be a verbal skill you remember. Men, on the other hand, they're better at math. And again, overgeneralization. I am not good at math. I am good at verbal stuff. And I am a man. But generally speaking, men are better at math. Men, generally speaking, are sort of more reckless. They're less intelligent about the consequences of their actions. Men are better at spatial reasoning. So this is shapes, design kind of stuff. If you've ever played the board game Blockus, in which you fit different shapes together on a board, men tend to be better at that than women in general on average. And men also, this is interesting too, men tend to have a wider variation in intelligence test scores. So one more time, going back to our normal curve, these standard deviations for if you gave this test to all men would be wider than they would be if you gave the test to all women. Again, in general, men tend to vary in their intelligence test scores more. So are intelligence tests biased? This is a controversial question, and it has a few different complicated answers. There's two meanings of bias when we talk about intelligence tests. The first is, do tests rely on past experiences and prior knowledge? And in this case, intelligence tests absolutely are biased, generally speaking. We'll look at an example of this tomorrow, actually, but or we did one today. Excuse me. You did an example today, but in general, tests can be biased because they rely on past experience, prior knowledge. So the Australian intelligence test that you took for the Aborigine tribe, that relied on past experiences that you do not have, prior knowledge that you do not have. So it was not a good measure of your intelligence. Meaning number two, and this is what we're more worried about, is scientific bias. And this is a test valid for only some groups and not others? In other words, if I give a test, will it be valid for women but not for men? Will it be valid for young people but not for old people? Will it be valid for one race and not others? If so, then and if that is the case, then it is scientifically biased. We can only trust its results for certain subgroups of people. One related concept to this is stereotype threat, which is a sort of self-confirming concern that one will be evaluated based on a negative perception. So for example, if you are, let's say you take an intelligence test and you are worried that like the people who give it to you are all men and you are a woman, and you are worried as a woman that they are going to stereotype you as being less intelligent because you are a woman. They are some sexist dudes. They are who just, you worried that they're gonna grade you more harshly than they should. That threat in your mind will actually cause you oftentimes to do worse on your test. Just having that threat in your mind, and that is stereotype threat. Wrapping up our discussion of intelligence tests, this is the last slide. Just some general things to take home, some little tidbits to remember to think about. Tests do seem, and by tests I mean intelligence tests do seem to favor those of certain cultural backgrounds. In the United States, intelligence tests favor white, middle class, and upper middle class people. They disadvantage people of color and people from the working class or from poor families. This is because they often rely on the use of certain language devices or personal experiences, background experiences that white, middle class, or upper middle class people are more likely to have had than people of color from a working class or a poor family. Tests can be used to discriminate between people, even though they're not designed to do so. They can be used to. But, so that's a negative. But they can also help schools identify those who need extra help. So like, let's say you scored a 65 on IQ test. So you technically have an intellectual disability. That can let the school know, okay, this is a kid we need to give some extra help to help them out. Tests, because of these issues that we've talked about, reliability, validity, bias, tests they cannot be viewed as measures of your overall worth or your value. There is no test to perfectly measure G. Remember, reification. You're trying to make an abstract concept concrete, and it's impossible to do. And general intelligence tests also really only signal one type of competence. They really, at the end of the day, are only guaranteed to tell you how good you are at taking intelligence tests. That is it. That is all. Ladies and gents, that wraps it up. Make sure, once again, you post a question on our classroom. And Enjoy your weekend. Adios.